an extremely exciting program of work. But one of the things that's really critical to this is that the data and indeed the models that we're producing, we want them to be used by as many people as would find them useful. So it's all about sharing that information with people, not just in collaboration directly with us at UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, although you're very welcome to collaborate with us, but for your own benefits as well, to make use of these national capability data sets and models. So in terms of the sort of ways in which you could benefit, we've been providing data, and there are opportunities to extend and increase the benefits and impact of UKSCAPE outcomes, including new links and new collaborations, both UK and also internationally. We really want to raise awareness around the data and the findings that we have been gaining through UKSCAPE with the academic community and also many other stakeholders. And I'm really delighted that so many people are here today to hear about UKSCAPE and the ways in which you might be able to benefit from this provision of information and data. And from that, we really hope that there will be development of new research themes and directions. And indeed, we've already seen that through things such as the NERC highlight topics, and it's really exciting to see the ways in which they are developing. I'm aware that's a lot of words, and I'm also aware that this afternoon is all about sharing our excitement around visualization and storytelling. And this is a visualization that I have put together on the basis of other people's things as well. And I straight away think probably you're thinking of all the ways in which it could be improved. And hopefully that's the mindset you're in for this afternoon around thinking about the visualizations. But I just wanted to say something very tangible about one of the aspects of our work within this very big UKSCAPE program. So one of the tangibles is for us, and it's within a task that I lead on annual status and trends reports for thousands of wildlife species, including non-native species. And I find this work really inspiring because we can get trends for many, many thousands of species, and that's just absolutely incredible. And we can do that because we have fantastic long-term and large-scale data sets, the raw data through observations, through biological recording, through the amazing volunteer recording community have been providing that data for many, many decades and indeed centuries. And because now we have amazing analytical techniques and amazing modelers who can use those analytical techniques, we can package this data in lots of different ways and process it and model it and produce a whole variety of exciting outcomes, whether they be indicators, or whether they be addressing questions around environmental change, for example, the effects of climate change on wildlife. So that's just to show you some of what's actually happening in terms of some actual detail within UKSCAPE. And these raw data and also the models are available there for other people to make use of. And this is a visualization that was inspiration for this course and for the visualization course that we're going to talk to you about today. So I will confess I'm not the best at design and visualization, but I do love great visualizations and stories. And this is one that Tom August, who's going to talk to us in a while, put together from the data that comes into iRecord for 1 year. And I think what's really inspiring is the way in which these biological records are coming in day after day. And you can see that spatial spread on the map. There aren't that many gaps really. That's incredible. There's this volunteer data gathered around what species has been seen by somebody, when it was seen and where it was seen. And so we get year on year these amazing data sets. And I'm an insect ecologist, so I get very excited that on that blue line on the line chart, the invertebrates are seeming to win the day in terms of numbers of records. But of course, this is just the data coming into one system, iRecord, and I'm sure you're all aware there are huge data sets out there for other groups as well, like the vertebrates through the British Trust for Ornithology data systems and the plant databases as well. But I just think it's a really wonderful way to present that data and just share the inspiring way in which volunteers are gathering this information that's so valuable to us. Oops, and I like it so much I'm presenting it again. Try and move to the next one. There we are. So just to give you an overview of this afternoon, I'm going to hand over to Tom August in a moment, and he's going to talk a bit about why visual storytelling. And then Peter Moore-Fuller, who was our fantastic organizer for the course, is going to talk more about visual storytelling in detail. And then we're going to hear from some of the people who were involved in this visualization course that was undertaken through the UK-SCAPE program, and they're going to talk about their visualizations and also the stories behind that data. And then Jan will talk a little bit about the evaluation, and all the way through, please do send in any questions that you might have in that chat. And finally, we'll end on ways in which you can access the data if it's of interest to you for your ongoing work. So I'm going to thank very much Peter Moore-Fuller and also Tom August and also Jan Dick for all of their role in getting us to this particular point. But to all of those who've been involved within this course and developing these visualizations, to thank them very much as well. And also to, of course, thank the UK-SCAPE programme and UKRI and the Natural Environmental Research Council. So over to you, Tom. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Helen.
I'll stop sharing so you can then share. We're going to have a bit of switching back and forth between sharing screens, but we'll try and do it as smoothly as we absolutely possibly can.
Great, thanks, Helen. Yes, I wanted to just briefly say why we thought the visual storytelling was interesting, and visual storytelling might be a phrase that you haven't heard talked about very much, and it is distinct from data visualization. So first of all, we have interesting stories to tell, and that's regardless of where you are. If you're in NGO, if you're in government, commercial, academia, charity, we all have interesting stories to tell with the data that we have. And in UKCEH, you've been hearing about UK-SCAPE, which is a particular project where we have very large data sets with interesting stories to tell. So we have these stories to tell, and visualizations are a really powerful way of telling those stories. Perhaps we traditionally tell stories in the papers that we write or in press releases that we put out. And visualizations are a great way to enrich those and to tell stories. It's also a way to engage with audiences that perhaps we don't traditionally reach. So, speaking as an academic, engaging visualizations can be a great way to connect with publics that are particularly interested in the research that I'm doing. So that's sort of where we were coming from. And it's worth noting that most people who attended this course and who are interested in this are already good at data visualization. So, as academics, we're already creating figures for papers and presentations and posters at conferences. So a lot of us already know how to create a plot, whether that's in Excel or in R or in Python or some other package. We know how to do plots, and we can create things like these. These are two plots from my most recent paper, pretty boring, but they present the data that I want people to see, and it enables them to interpret that and get information from it. So we can do this, but I think what we don't have the skills in is turning that into a really engaging story in a visual way. So the way we saw it was there's a lot to learn from the field of design. What you see on the right-hand side here are just a couple of figures from a whole series of figures that were created by a design company using data from UK-SCAPE. So it's using species observation data from during the lockdown, the first lockdown. And it was created by the Natural History Museum. The Natural History Museum funded it. And they were interested in how recording, so members of the public observing and recording these wildlife through our systems, how that changed during the lockdown. And you can see how a number of taxonomic groups at the top increased, and down below you can see a bit more detail about how a couple of different bird species changed. And these are really engaging visualizations, sort of visualizations you see, in coffee table books, that you see on the Guardian news blog, First Cat of the Day here, that you see in sort of online journalism, really engaging. Now, I feel like as academics, we could do this if we had just the bits of theory, design theory, that get you to here. I think we can all achieve this. It's not that we don't have the capacity to do it, perhaps we don't have the knowledge. And so I think we thought there was a real gap there to just get a bit more understanding of design, a bit more understanding of design theory, of visual storytelling, that would help us to move a little bit closer to what you see here, away from our comfort zone of sort of R or Excel or whatever it is. So that was where the sort of genesis for the course come from. And I'm going to hand over to Peter, who's going to talk about what we covered in this course. And then after that, we'll move on to showing some of our outputs. So I'm going to stop sharing. And Peter, you should be able to take command.
Thank you, Tom. Greetings, good afternoon. So my name is Peter. Just to introduce myself just a little bit, nice to see so many people here. I am a graphic designer, so I'm not a scientist. I've been working in science communication for a long time, and most of the time I've spent working in my career, I've been communicating information in one way or another. So I work with the NHS, I work with research institutes and universities, education and healthcare are my kind of comfort zone. And most of the design work that I do is communicating fairly complex information to lots of different audiences. Now, in 2015, just to give you a quick history of where we come from with this, I was asked to join a project called the Marine Knowledge Exchange Network. I don't know if any of you heard of that project, but it was an impact accelerator project funded by NERC, run through the University of East Anglia. And I was asked to help to organize a range of different collaborations between designers and scientists. And this is really my passion, is trying to bridge these two worlds of science on one side and design on the other, to try and create better communication and knowledge exchange and impact and all those kind of wonderful words that we talk about all of the time. What this turned into, we found that the most successful way to get designers and scientists to collaborate was actually to give the scientists more skills in design and to teach them the kind of basic design principles and a little bit of software to give them a foothold in what they were trying to do. And we started doing this in 2015, created a training program, and it's changed my life completely as a process. I've become even more passionate about it. And I left my day job as creative director of a design agency in the east of England to pursue it as a career. Lockdown has been really interesting for us because we had to start offering our training online, and actually we've had our busiest year ever. We've had a very good time in lockdown compared to others who have not. But we've worked really, really hard. We've got this program running, which runs on a sort of rolling basis over 6 months, where we've had nearly 200 PhD students and early career researchers come into our design program for 6 months. And we teach them a lot of things in that time. It's sort of workshops every week, and they get to come and learn design software and then design posters, visual abstracts, infographics, process diagrams, data visualizations, logos, animated GIFs, all sorts of things. So I've been having a great time with that. And then we've discovered this collaboration with UK-SCAPE. We were approached by Tom to come in and create this kind of mini program with UK-SCAPE and stakeholders to try and get some of the work that we do across in the space for a few months. We've also been running special training programs with European Commission over the last couple of years, and just working with British Antarctic Survey at the moment on a very similar program to the one that I'm about to describe to you now. So that's me. The technology, just in case any of you are interested, that we use to do this in terms of managing these kind of fairly complex online collaborations, we use Zoom like we're using today to sort of see and hear each other all of the time and to communicate during workshops. We operated a small community during the training program on Slack. And if you don't know Slack, it's just a very simple sort of message board platform where you can run your own community. It's free up to a certain point, and we were using the free version. And everybody on the training program got to come into Slack, and we could use it to organize training sessions, and also to kind of share information and best practice and inspiration and knowledge through the program. We used Miro a little bit, and I'll talk about that in a second in terms of what we did. Miro is like an online whiteboard type of thing. So we had some workshops which were more about just sort of gathering ideas and discussing them. So we used Miro for that. And importantly, we had some design software. So the design software that we use on our program is called Affinity Designer. There are many, many, many other design programs that you can use. Anthony's just put in the chat that it's amazing. I completely agree, Anthony, and that it's 50% off on all products. Yes, so they have lockdown discount at the moment, which is amazing. Many people will have used Inkscape or Adobe Illustrator, and it's very much akin to that kind of software. So it enables us to create vector illustrations and to manage photographs and things like that as well. The reason why we use Affinity as opposed to Inkscape, which is free, is that it's very easy to learn. And I find this incredibly important because when we're doing design work, the first thing that we do is we start training people in the software and trying to give them some skills. And if you can't get into it quickly, if it doesn't feel intuitive quickly, then some people give up, unfortunately. So we found Affinity really good for that. It's also not a subscription, so it's just a one-off cost on software, which for our purposes, when we're working with researchers, makes it very affordable and easy for people to keep the software after they've done our programs. So it means that we have a kind of legacy of ability to carry on with the skills. Good, okay, fantastic. So this is our kind of program overview. This is what we did. We arranged a number of workshops between a few weeks in October and November. We started off with a project framing workshop, and I'll tell you about these in detail in a minute. And then we looked at the software training and then started to apply that knowledge into some specific workshops as well. We had a few drop-ins and evaluations. And if anybody's thinking about creating any kind of collaborative program like this, having multiple dates available for the different workshops was really important, because one of the things about researchers and people working in institutes is they're extremely time poor and busy. And having some flexibility around these kind of workshops, giving people different options, meant that we got pretty good figures in terms of attendance, and something that we've gone on to do in other programs as well, to be really nice and flexible. So we started off with a project framing workshop, and this is just a sample of the work that we did there. We asked people to set some basic objectives for their work. We asked people to assess where they thought their skills were at the moment and the kind of software that they were using, both in terms of design and in terms of data visualization and that sort of thing, to try and assess what the need was. We also asked people to tell us, what inspired them from a visual point of view. And that image that Tom showed us a moment ago was definitely one of the ones that came up very, very early. So we started off with that. And then we went into basic design principles. Now, whenever we do a design principles session, we talk about these four things. We talk about color, images, typography, and composition. And we find that whatever audience we're working with in these kind of sessions, they have very mixed knowledge of these things. And most people know something about all of these different aspects. So just to give you a few examples, with color, we're talking about different color systems like RGB for screen, red, green, and blue. We're talking about CMYK for print, which is cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And we talk about the difference between those two color systems, and one is ink and one is light. And we talk about conversions and those sorts of things. In terms of images, one of the big takeaways for me is that not everybody knows that there are raster images and vector images. And this is really interesting to me because the information is very basic, but a lot of people have never been told this or have never found it out for themselves. Raster images are those ones that are made up of little pixels, so we use for photographs and that sort of thing. And vector images are those that are essentially made out of maths, a set of kind of coded instructions to create shapes with dimensions and curves via different equations and things like that. So these are all really basic things, but they're really important to us, our understanding of improving our design work. Typography is a big hobby of mine. People get very bored of getting typographical amends from me. But I think typography is extremely important. So we talk a bit about fonts, we talk about legibility, but we talk about many more things than font size when it comes to legibility. So we're talking about line spacing, paragraph spacing, justification, all these kind of different factors that come together and how they affect people's perceptions of the text in front of them. And then in composition, composition is tough. It's one of those things where people think that maybe there's one brilliant form of composition that will help everybody in every circumstance. And really good composition is a lot more like cake. There are many different lovely cakes in the world. There are very many different methods of producing those cakes, and composition is a lot like that. But we talk about alignments, we talk about using space and white space. I mean, I can't quite give a workshop here today. Maybe we could do that another time. We talk about creating visual contrast and use of color to create successful compositions. So these principles really underpin everything that we do and hopefully get people to the same position, because the big things that we talk about is that anyone can improve. You know, the graphic that Tom showed us earlier is a fantastic visual, but it was designed professionally in a studio, experienced in data visualization and working in research communication. And we're not also lucky. So some people kind of look at those kind of things and think, well, that's really unattainable, so I'm not going to try. Whereas actually, anybody can improve their design work. You don't have to be creative. You don't have to be artistic. You don't have to be able to draw any of those things. You can learn the functional side, the mathematical side of making better design work and improving everything that you can do. And one of the major ways that you do that is by understanding that you're in control and making good decisions. So I don't know if anybody here has ever designed a research poster in PowerPoint. And the classic thing when I watch people do this is that you sort of chuck the content in, you move it left a bit, you move it right a bit, you create your graph in Excel, you kind of copy and paste it in and drop it in. And we very often do these things without necessarily thinking about the decisions that we're making when we do it. So if you do create that pie chart in Excel, maybe you take the default formatting, or maybe you put some thought into it and spend a bit of time making it work better. So even if you just accept the defaults that are given to you in these pieces of software that we all use every day, you are making a decision to keep the design looking like that and to communicate in that way. So one of the things that we tried to do early on is to just give people an idea through all these design principles and ideas about the decisions that they're making, even if you just leave it kind of as it is. Right, so we then moved on into actual software training. It's a lot of fun. Design software is, I find that researchers get quite far quite quickly. And we start off with very kind of geometric design styles. So this is Tom's output from one of our first workshops. Sorry, Tom, to put this here without telling you. But if we look at Tom's robot for a second, if I grab a pen, here we go. We have a square. We have a semicircle, quarter circle. We have a circle here. We've got some triangles. They're all really basic geometric shapes. And one of the things that we do is get people to look at illustrations and infographics that they see kind of on the internet and in papers and things that they might look at as being very successful designs. And actually, a lot of what underpins those successful designs are very, very simple shapes and ideas that can be put together in different combinations. So even if you can't draw, or if you're not creative, you can learn how to construct a fairly complex illustration at a very, very, very simple element. So this is well worth bearing in mind. We also did some more complex things. So we created these ladybirds that you can see on the right-hand side of your slide at the moment. We also created some fish in one of the workshops as well. Now, my cursor has disappeared. I'm trying to get rid of my annotations. Bear with me just a moment while I try and clear this. There we go, fantastic. Hopefully my cursor will return and we'll be able to crack on. Bear with me, just a brief technical problem.
I doubt I can help, Peter, but let me know if I can.
No, it's fine. It's solved.
It's back. It's back.
Broke it by trying to annotate the pages, so I won't do that anymore. Apologies for the brief interruption.
No, it gave us longer to look at the ladybirds, which was great.
Oh, yeah. So, you know, we used some basic techniques. The ladybirds were created just by sort of tracing over the top of photographs, which is another, if you can't draw, it's a really fantastic way of learning how to illustrate things. Is if you have a photograph, then you can create an illustration very easily. This fish is another really good example of that, where we're just looking at the kind of the major areas of color in a photograph and using those to create shapes to illustrate these concepts really nicely. So after we'd all got a grounding in the software, we then moved on into some specific workshops where we tried to put these skills into practice. Now, our infographics workshop, I gave 3 challenges, and one of them is presented here, and I gave them very meanly just in the form of a raw text file. So there was no kind of visual instruction given at all. We went through a little design thinking process of trying to consider our audience, trying to consider, you know, what the audience expectations might be, the key messages that we thought were coming across from the text information, and then working on these kind of sketched compositions of how that might come together into an infographic. And I've got Andy's example here. There were many others of very different compositions that came out of the same text file. And then we spent some time just in a supervised work environment. So we're just on Zoom, and everybody in the workshop was working on their own ideas, their own compositions, and putting the software into practice. And here you can see the marvelous transition from Andy's sketch into the infographic that he then created. And this workshop takes place over about 3 hours, just to give you an indication when you're sort of starting out as to what kind of pace of progress you might make in that time. If you look at Andy's infographic, it's lovely, but if you look really carefully at it, it's simple. We have some basic geometric shapes put together in different combinations, but it's done with a purpose and a good sense of communication and the key messages behind it. So we can then create really successful visual storytelling from those kind of techniques. Now, we then had another set of workshops on bringing data into design. So a lot of what we were doing was working with these data sets and starting to think about this process, fascinating process of turning data visualizations into more kind of visual storytelling. So we started off, one of the exercises that we did was we started off with this map that you can see on the left-hand side of our screen, which was just created by Tom in R. And we brought it into our design software. Now, this is a really interesting area in terms of bringing data visualizations into design software to play with them and improve with them. There are some arguments to say that you shouldn't do that. I'm completely aware of those arguments. And once you bring the data in, it's no longer dynamic. So the data is kind of static then after that point. So that's a consideration. But what it does do is it gives us the opportunity to play visually with that information and also to integrate it into our design work. So Steve did this piece of work on the program during our session that time, which I thought was really, really good. So we're just kind of taking this raw ingredient from R and just processing it a bit in the software to change the colors. We're making decisions, things like the latitudes and longitudes have disappeared in Steve's graphics. You know, we very often in data visualization, we get these axes, grids, structures, lines, all these things that just sort of appear by default in our graphics. And we don't tend to think all that much about whether they're necessary or whether they communicate or whether they help us communicate our key messages at all. So Steve's version is pared back, he's changed the colors, he's integrated his legend into the map a little bit better. You know, America has a wonderful shaped coast here, and it looks much better with the legends integrated into the map rather than hanging here off the side. And importantly, the other thing that Steve's done is he's started telling the story by directly labeling the data, not in the caption, not in the prose that goes along with it, but directly into the graphic. And I find this is a very important concept to try and get across, and something that some of these journalistic teams in terms of Guardian data and some of the American newspapers, things like that, do extremely well. And Steve has directly labeled his key points here. We've got New York, the most popular city, and California, the most popular state, and they are directly labeled. So yes, this was used, just to answer the question in the chat, this was created, first of all, in R in terms of the raw sort of data and the shapes coming in. It was exported in vector format from R. So you never quite know which is going to be best. It might be SVG, it might be PDF, it might be EPS, depending on what kind of software that you're using. And then you bring it into Affinity Designer and start to wrangle the information that's come in from your data viz software into the design software to work with it. So one of the things that you find, things like all these orange data points on this map, that translates in the design software as thousands of objects, tiny circles, all colored in the same color. in our design software that have to be kind of grouped and then sort of treated in different ways to help them. But it's a very interesting process, and you never quite know. It's really dependent on the visualization, what it is that you're trying to communicate, what software you're using. There's lots of different factors at play, and as a kind of work stream, from taking one piece of statistical software and then another piece of statistical software into a design program, you never quite know what the task is going to be. And this reflects my professional practice over 20 years of receiving graphs from researchers to put into reports and publications and that sort of thing. This is very much the kind of process that we would go through, because these two worlds of software are really separate. They're really different. You know, the people that make R don't necessarily talk to the people that make Adobe Illustrator or Inkscape or Affinity. And these two software worlds are very, very separate. In fact, over the course of doing this over the last sort of year or two, got a fantastic relationship with Affinity. They're a UK-based company in Nottingham, and they've been really interested to know. They didn't know that people were using their software for science communication at all, and they didn't really know what science communication was in the first place. So it's a really interesting area. Just to wrap up my little presentation here, sorry, I've gone on a little bit longer. Yeah, so there is a question which I'll just answer now in terms of time, and time is such a big factor. Unfortunately, it's very hard to answer the question about how long things take. If I just go back a slide, we did this kind of visualization. Probably Steve's work here took about 30 minutes, based on this kind of raw input from R, then coming into the software. But Steve had already spent 3 hours with me learning the software and getting his skills kind of updated, and had a bit of practice time as well. So it doesn't have to take very long, and if you invest in time and a bit of sort of training, either with somebody like me or by yourself, kind of tutorials and things like that, then you can get to the point where you can do these things very quickly. And being able to do them quickly is brilliant, because you can then really think visually on your feet and create different versions of your visual stories quickly, which you can then assess against each other. And that's really the level of attainment that's really good to get to. If you can do that, if you can prototype quickly from these kind of inputs, then you can create fantastic graphics and test them on yourself or with colleagues or with wider groups to see what's working. The other thing, sorry, I will stop in a moment, but the other thing that's really interesting about this workflow is that we've had people who have experimented in the design software to find a look and feel that they enjoyed and liked, and then gone back into the visualization software to code it. So very often, if you have a bit of skill in the design software, you can quickly prototype and find what you want to code, and then you can keep that kind of dynamic data visualization going, either sort of online or in your visualization software as you go through. Right, fantastic. So I'll just come to my kind of main learning points. So one of the things that I've learned over the last few years, really working with researchers, is that design knowledge and ability amongst researchers is very different. And one of my favorite things to do is just to try and bring people up to that first level where they understand the basic design principles and understand the rudimentary kind of geometric shapes. And the improvement that comes from that is enormous. I mean, it would be lovely if everybody got to that standard that Tom was showing us earlier with the Natural History Museum graphics. But if I can just get people to the point where they're thinking about aligning things, you know, tidying things up, using vectors at all. I mean, a world for me where research posters have graphs on them that are not pixelated would be absolutely wonderful. These are the kind of improvements that I'm really passionate about. So I think it's very possible to get people very quickly to the point where they understand things a lot better. I also discovered, particularly on this program, that people's needs and methods are really, really different, but the design principles that we talked about were universally helpful. And that really reflects my professional practice as well. I'm happy when I'm working on a design commission or something like that with a research group or or university, they can bring me any kind of data visualization. I'm not scared of any particular type of visualization, because I know that with the kind of design processes we can go through, we can question, interrogate that data visualization and create a story from it. So the design principles held up with this group, which was great. And the other thing that I really learned, that I think the people that got the most out of the program were the people that put it into practice. So skills training is wonderful, and actually I found that institutions find it a lot easier to give staff members time to train. What they find it a lot harder to do is to give them time to actually put skills into practice a lot of the time. And the people that I think really excelled on this particular program were the people who then had time to put the skills that they learned into practice and create something with their own research. Good. So that's my last slide for now. I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about all the design work that we're going to see and try and pull out a few key messages, but I'm happy to take. Do you want to do questions now, Helen, or do you
Yeah,
want to...
if anyone, we can have a couple of minutes now for some additional questions. It's been great that you've answered some of the questions as we've been going through, Peter. So thank you very much for that. And
No worries.
that was a really excellent presentation, and yeah, really lovely reminder and memories of having been on the course. And I think that from my perspective, just some of the more sort of simple things that I learned that I perhaps wouldn't have thought about myself, like for example, sort of decluttering a map and taking away some of the grid, but also I had never really thought to annotate in the way with the arrows and the messages within the graphic as well. So there were some really fantastic things that have been incredibly useful. And I think the way in which we were collaboratively working on the workshops, I met many people within CEH, but we also invited people from outside of UKCEH to join us and to work in partnership with us through the program. So it was really excellent. And thank you so much, Peter, for making it so enjoyable. So if anyone has any quick questions, I think one has just come in. Oh, that's Ingo, has been already Googling to find out how much Affinity Designer is. They'll be getting an increase in sales, which is great. Michael asked, do you have tips about the use of pen and paper versus design software for mocking up initial ideas and designs?
Yeah, sure. Michael, I think it's a really good idea. I've worked and trained a lot of professional designers as well as a lot of sort of people in research environments trying to learn design skills. And not everybody thinks with pen and paper well, but one of the things that we do is just try and get people to think first about the kind of written task on paper. So writing down key messages, writing down those kind of target audiences, and thinking deeply about target audience as well. So we ban the words general public in our workshops. And I will interrogate people. If they tell me policy audience, I'll interrogate them down to tell me, which government, what ministry, and then eventually what member of staff, and we'll kind of drill it down that far, because it's very useful to have those things in mind. We then did some kind of doodling processes. So just looking at those key messages and thinking about the things that you need to get across, and not thinking about composition, but just doodling what kind of things you might need is very, very helpful. And it just starts you off putting pen to paper, and just having the pencil in your hand is a great way of thinking. And it can help lots of things come out that you didn't necessarily know were there. And then what we do is take those doodles and start to try and arrange them into a composition on paper. Now, we did it really, really quickly, but you can apply some more kind of extended processes of testing and doing lots of quick kind of prototypes on paper, and asking people what they think, and trying to, questions like, here's my sketch, what do you think the key message is, and asking people to come back to you and just checking that your kind of key messages are being reflected in that composition. And then you've got something to work with. And I'd advise anybody doing any kind of visual storytelling, whether you're using design software or not, if you're creating data viz, before you start coding, just to try and sketch what it is that you're actually trying to create, and just think, is this something that is going to communicate what I think it's going to communicate? And once you've got something down on a piece of paper, you can actually look at it, and you can ask other people to look at it and see if it's going to work or not. I hope that answers your question.
That's an excellent answer. Thank you, Peter. I'm going to take one more quick question just because I think it's a really excellent question from Chloe. She says she's only been dabbling with R recently and still use Excel predominantly. Is she at a disadvantage for visual storytelling because of not being so experienced with coding?
No, I would say not. I mean, obviously there's more that you can do in R than there is in Excel, but if you need a pie chart, if you need a line graph, these things are very, very easy to create in Excel. And I think what we found on the program was that people were using a real mixture of things. There were a lot of people doing quite complicated things in R and Python and software like that, but there were also a lot of people using PowerPoint, using Excel every day to create data visualizations. And the important thing is that when you come to a piece of software like Excel, let's say you create a pie chart. In fact, sorry if we're going to run out of time. I will just grab a file to illustrate this, if that's okay, and I'll share it. It will only take me a moment, I promise.
No, that's really fine, Peter. What we will then do, so while you're finding that, we will be moving into the part where we hear some of the stories about creating the visualizations and the science stories behind those visualizations. So we'll hear one of those and we'll take a short break and then we'll be back for the others. But yeah, over to Peter to give us a live demonstration.
Well, not so much of a live demo, but I just want to get you thinking about this in a way that we've got a very basic pie chart here created in Excel, and this was taken from this graphic on the right hand side from the Guardian website, which is very nicely produced, and you can see it communicates very nicely. The Guardian do very nice data visualization. If you put this data just into Excel spreadsheet and create a pie chart, this is what you get. This is the pie chart that you are given, and you would be completely forgiven for thinking that this represents best practice, because this is the default that is produced immediately when you click the button in Excel, and I wouldn't blame you for that. But what I'd ask you to do is just to look carefully at it and think, well, actually, is this communicating in the best way? So there's a lot of clutter. We've got all these white lines. They're not really necessary. We've got all these colors. They're not really necessary. The way that the title is arranged creates these massive white spaces on either side that aren't really doing anything for the design. There's a disconnect between these tiny little legend squares with the colors and the pie chart itself, which are then solved here over on the Guardian side. So I could use this as raw ingredients to take into my design software and create something that looks a lot better, like the Guardian side, but this is what you're given to begin with. So my big advice, if you're using Excel, it's great, but just really question what's put in front of you from a data visualization point of view and just see if you can improve it in any way. Right.
Great, thank you very much, Peter. So we're going to move, Peter's with us all afternoon, so if you have other questions that are more general, aside from the questions you might have about the presentations you're about to see, please just keep putting them into the chat and we'll try and get through as many as possible through the afternoon. But we're now going to go through 7 presentations, very rapid presentations, and essentially each of the speakers is going to present their visualization and the story that they're telling very rapidly, sort of 5 minutes rapidly, and then Peter is going to have a discussion with them and talk a little bit more about the design side. And you're really welcome to post questions and to make this as interactive as we possibly can. I'm really delighted there's so many people here, and it'd be great to have your ideas and thoughts. So I'm going to hand over to Tom. I'm going to be sharing my screen, so apologies if that makes it a little bit clunky for everyone, but this we thought was the best way. So just let me begin by sharing my screen. Hopefully it's there, and then we can move to the, is that what you're expecting to see, Tom?
Sure.
Great.
Yeah. Do you want to just skip straight to the next?
Yes, I will.
Slide.
There we are.
So, so I'll just very quickly introduce these visualizations. So I work with data collected by citizen scientists of wildlife observations in the UK, collected at the Biological Records Centre at the UKCEH. And I wanted to create some visualizations about the biases in this data that's collected. So go to the next slide, please, Helen. So biological records are increasing over time. The amount of data we have increases over time. You can see here on this plot from Excel, we've got all these different taxonomic groups, different lines, and the number of records is increasing mostly exponentially. There's a log axis there on the vertical, so increasing over time. And we have figures like this one on the left, which we use. There's a team of maybe 4 or 5 of us, And this figure will probably appear in every one of our presentations that we give at the beginning where we're introducing the data. And so what I wanted to do is sort of reimagine these figures and think about how we can improve them, seeing as we're using them so frequently. Next slide, Helen. So this figure on the left, which I've now faded out, actually has more than one element in it. And one of those things that's interesting is the number of people collecting data has increased over time. So that's what I presented here. Thinking about the design elements that came in here that Peter was touching on. So one of the things that was new to me was this like consistency of spacing. So consistency of white space. So I don't have control of the cursor, but the gap between the bars is pretty much the same as the gaps between the text and the edge of the margin and the title and the pink area. So all these gaps are sort of the same size. Another thing I really struggle with personally is color palettes. I think I don't have an eye for color and what colors look good together. The green, the lightest green that you see here is a green from the logo, the Bilateral Record Center. And then in Affinity Designer, you can tell it to kind of find colors that match that color or are antagonistic, that like really stand out against that color. And I found this sort of main pink color from that, and then I created a palette from that pink color. So these colors all sort of link back to that green. In terms of the bars, I got rid of the y-axis completely because I just figured I could put a number above each bar, and that really simplified things. Same with the x-axis. Just put this sort of big one arrow from one year to the next. And then because we're talking about people, Peter suggested having the bars represented by people, which I thought was kind of a really neat idea of communicating what the bars represent by what's actually in them. So Peter did most of the thinking, I think, that went into this one, but I was really happy with this. And I think it really simply, gets across that story about how the number of people contributing to this is changing over time. Okay, next slide, please, Helen. So the other side of this graph is that because we've got more people, we've got more data. And so this is for the same time period. And it just very simply shows that, we've got an increase in the number of observations of these species. I was playing around with having the size of the icon on the right being increased by the percentage that's indicated underneath, but that increasing the volume or the area of an object is really hard to then interpret actually how much it's changed. So that's why we have this big percentage number written underneath, so it's obvious what the actual number is. Next slide. Another thing we often talk about is spatial bias, and this figure on the left is a figure that we always use. It's a figure of the top 4 recorders of grasshoppers and where they record most, and it kind of exemplifies that bias. This is really important for our analyses, understanding this bias, and for people who are interpreting our results, it's really important they understand that bias. Next slide. So this was a figure I created in R. I can't remember the technical name for this sort of drawing, but essentially, I'm sure you kind of get the flavor of it. The vice counties are blown up or deflated according to how many observations there were in them, and they're also colored by that same parameter. So I produced this in R, and then I exported it as a PDF into Affinity Designer. Next slide, please. And then this is using a lot of the things that Peter's already talked about. And one thing, like Helen, I'd never really thought about adding labels. I think probably as like an academic publishing in a paper, you think that the data should speak for itself. But when you're creating a story, having these little tags that come out helps you, really helps you tell that story. So I just picked out a couple of interesting things. The place, Scotland has very few records. Berkshire has a lot. Making sure this text all aligns nicely. Changing the legend so that, rather than having like 200,000 written out all in digits, just sorting it to 200K, little things like that. And including that little mini map of GB, so that you can do that really easy comparison between the skewed image and the complete image. Okay, next slide. And then the idea was that all these came together into a sort of little infographic, which then captures all these biases together. And you can see the green color from the BRC logo, which I used as a leaping off point for the rest of the colors. And thanks to Peter, who gave a lot of input into these, and everyone else on the course. Actually, that's one thing I should say that I really learned, was just getting your visualizations in front of other people is a fantastic way to get feedback and to learn it. And that can be scary because we're all sensitive to criticism. So thanks also to all the speakers today who are putting their visualizations up there in front of other people.
Yeah, no, it was really wonderful to have all that feedback, and it is kind of scary, but it was also a lot of fun actually. It was very friendly and lots of fun in terms of that part. So Peter, over to you for the first questions, but please, if anyone has any other questions, do post in the chat. Tom, I can't see the chat with the screen display I have at the moment, so you'll have to watch for your own questions, I'm afraid. Or Siobhan, perhaps you could look at the questions for me. Over to you, Peter and Tom.
Well, so it's just a couple of comments really, Tom. I mean, I think there are some principles that I'm going to try and pull out of the work that we see this afternoon. And one of the things that I just want to, this particular slide that I want to pull out is this idea of groups of graphics come together very often. Very often we see a paper and the figures are kind of grouped together, and maybe they've been supplied by 3 different people and they don't have any kind of relationship in terms of the graphics that are presented there. Whereas I think what we're seeing here really, really well from Tom is that you can put together a grid of different figures using the same color palettes, using some of the same design principles and ideas, and they look really professional and communicate extremely well. So yeah, I think that's excellent, Tom. The point that Tom was making excellently about captioning is just so important, and it came for me. I learned about this working on a project with the Tyndall Centre, based at the University of East Anglia, who prepared a set of design principles called the MADE principles, and I'll try and pull out a link to this and send it in the chat before the end of the session. But it was a set of recommendations on data visualization for the IPCC that they created. So all about the sort of communication of climate change information, but I think that it applies all over the place. And that's one of the things that I really picked up from working with them, this idea that you very often present your graphics isolated with a caption or as part of a piece of prose or something like that. But very often that's not the end of the story for that graphic. It might be copied and pasted. It might be sent off. Somebody might take your PowerPoint slide and kind of just stick your visualization on their PowerPoint slide. And if you remove that written context of captions or prose alongside, then you don't often then deliver your key message. Whereas if it's integrated, you stand a much better chance of that message going forward wherever your graphic goes to. Yeah, there's a really good question from Katie about whether academic journals would accept such captioning. I don't know. I think they'd have really different attitudes. I mean, it's a much more conventional method of communication. You would, if it's in a journal, it would definitely have that kind of figure caption with it. So my advice is always to try and clearly communicate. And if for their conventions they ask you to take something out, then you probably have to go with that. But I've seen some really fantastic things in journals too. Yeah.
I've worked out now how to share, to see the chat and share the screen, so you can relax, Tom, on that. But yeah, there's lots of people praising your work as well. But Peter, you're doing very well at finding the questions too. So yeah, lots of praise. There was a question that about exporting data from Excel to Affinity Designer. I think that's probably one to take offline, so do drop a message. I mean, it was quite straightforward to do it within the systems. The export is similar to you would find in other packages, I would say. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Peter.
Well, just yeah, I mean, we can take any of those conversations offline if necessary. If you do have any questions, just send them to the contact that you have, probably Helen, and I'll be happy to get in touch with people. There's a couple of questions just come into the chat, and I'll just deal with this about color palettes and accessibility. So this is the question that comes up very, very often, and there are some really fantastic palettes out there. Again, I'll find a link for us by the end of the session. If you are interested in considering the needs of people with color blindness, then that's definitely something that you can do. There are palettes available. You can look at it. I would just add to that very often we talk about color blindness only when it comes to accessibility, and very often people consider color blindness as part of their kind of tick box of accessibility, and it really affects 10% of white men largely. So if you are really interested in accessibility of data visualization, there are lots of people who write very well on that topic. And it's multifaceted. There are many, many things going on. The most important thing for me, if you can't do it all, which you can never do in one graphic, is to be responsive if somebody with an accessibility need comes to you about your data viz, and provide for them if you can, and ask them what they need, because it's not just as simple as color blindness. Sadly, there are many other types of impairment or accessibility needs that people might have. There is, yeah, I mean, asking Affinity, Katie's got an idea. We could add a colorblind filter button in Affinity. The other thing to remember about accessibility is that very often people have adaptive technologies themselves. So very often people are taking care of themselves. So check with think about your audience, think about what kind of needs they might have, and go that way. There's some great resources coming into the chat as well. I'll just let people.
Yeah, no, there is, and some great compliments on your visualizations, Tom, and some great comments around colors and thinking about more. So that's just absolutely fantastic. That's exactly what we wanted to do this afternoon, is to have a few hours just thinking about these beautiful designs. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to suggest that we all take a 5-minute break. I'm going to stay within the Zoom screen and here if anyone wants to chat about anything or anyone wants to ask any questions. I'll stay here, but if everyone else can stay within the Zoom and just switch your camera off and your mute on if that's not already the case, and enjoy a 5-minute break. But please do come back promptly at 5 past, because we've got lots of other exciting visualizations to share with you. And thank you to everyone so far who's spoken, and to all of you for your wonderful comments and chat as well. See you in 5 minutes, unless you're staying here for a chat. That's great to be reminded, Peter, of many of the wonderful things that we did throughout the course. And yeah, it's been lovely seeing everyone's presentations as well as they've been coming through, and everyone has an exciting afternoon ahead of seeing those.
Yeah. I love it when we're involved in training people, and 3 years later they come back to me with their paper and say,
yeah,
look, here's that graphic we started 3 years ago.
It's fantastic. I think the progress that people make as well is just incredible. How fast that happens. It's incredible.
I'm just going through the questions because I think I probably missed.
Yeah, there was a flurry.
There was a flurry. I missed a question from Rob Parker. I don't know if you're around, Rob, during the break.
We can pick it up straight away afterwards if you like it.
Sure. I'll try and write down the ones we didn't get to.
Yeah, that would be great. I can also copy all of the chat at the end.
Rob is
or I can ask Siobhan. Okay,
I could do that.
Yeah, thanks, Siobhan. That would be great.
Yes, if you could definitely, Siobhan, take a save of the chat. That would be really useful.
Need any help with anything else?
Yeah, fantastic. Rob, knowing that you're around, you asked about the colours in the Guardian palette. I mean, the thing about representation of colours, it's a really difficult subject, and I'll just tell you a quick anecdote. I used to work, my first ever job in design was working in recruitment advertising. I used to design job adverts for newspapers for the NHS. And we had a director in the agency I was working for that would never ever allow the use of red in an advert because she thought it signified blood. And I used to rather cheekily say back to her, well, we can't use black text because black represents death. And that you get into the representation of colors can be really diverse in terms of people's understanding. You sometimes see blogs about logo design and brand design giving advice about the psychology of colors and the meanings that they might have. And it's a very difficult subject, I think, to get overly concerned about, because you can make really good arguments either way. People say that red logos are aggressive and things like that, and you then look at sort of all the airlines and things that have red logos, and it doesn't necessarily compute. It's one of those things that's very easy to say. I would say for that pie chart specifically, it's probably just part of the color palette that the Guardian data team have got laying around. They probably have a house color palette that they use. And the most important thing in the color that you saw on that pie chart earlier is that the segments were distinct from each other. And that's really probably as meaningful as it gets. Just that the data can be seen and compared. It's much better to use two colors in a pie chart to make them distinct from each other than it is to use 7 or 8 different colors and try to ask people to look between them, because all you're doing is just saying this is where one begins and ends, and that's really, really useful, and much better use of design than trying to illustrate everything with the color. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, Robert said thanks in the chat, so that's
Great.
great. So Ben asked about the recording. Yes, we're going to post the recording onto the UKSCAPE website, and yeah, we'd be really delighted for more people to watch it, and for others to ask questions or to comment on any of the visualizations, or particularly around as well opportunities for using the data. Just yeah, keep in touch. Great. We have 1 more minute to the break, but I'm going to get ready for the next. Is there a slide now that's saying Heather Harris on it?
Yeah.
Great. Heather, are you here with us, ready for us to begin in a short while?
Yes, yes, I am here. That's
Perfect.
not
No, it's not yours. It's not yours. It's my placeholder to remind me of where I'm moving through. I shall move to yours, so Heather. There we are.
Lovely.
Much more beautiful.
Yeah, oh, that's okay. It's just, oh my gosh, my notes are all wrong already.
Oh no, I was just as well, adding the anticlimax of just my slide with Heather Harris written on it, and to bring out your beautiful, beautiful slide. I love this puffin. I think it's amazing. Well, it is 5 past, and I'm hoping that most people are back. We've had a nice chat over this last 5 minutes. We've been talking more about the sort of colour choices, which is obviously really interesting for a lot of people, and also there's been a few more questions around affinity and whether it's a one-off license, and the costs and things around that. So hopefully you can follow those within the chat, but if you have any further questions, keep posting them in the chat. If we can't get them to you this afternoon, we'll endeavour to send you answers after this particular webinar. So I think hopefully everyone is back here. You've already got another positive comment, Heather, from Ingo on that, loving that puffin. And I think we've got more pleasurable things such as that to see coming up in a short while. So Heather, I'm going to hand over to you to give your presentation, and then Peter will join for the discussion afterwards. So over to you, Heather.
Thank you, Helen. Hi, everybody. I'm Heather Harris, and I'm the multimedia editor, graphic designer at UKCEH, working within the communications and engagement team. I've worked in the design and print trade for over 37 years now, so I'm a bit of an old hand, but there's always lots more to learn. So I was really excited and inspired to get the opportunity to join the visual storytelling training. I'm not a scientist, not by any stretch of the imagination, so my knowledge of data and how to use it or interpret it is slim to none, and therefore I was hoping to do the reverse of everyone else and pick up some clues about data from the training. However, I was delighted to find that I also picked up more design tips as well. As I said, there's always more to learn, even for old timers like me. And it was super excited to get enthused about a new subject. And I'm excited that this year I'll be working alongside Tom on some data visualization for a big international report for IPBES on alien species. Could I have the next slide, please, Helen? Oh, I need to turn as well. Yeah. So like all of us, my role is always really full on, and I work to really tight deadlines. So therefore, sadly, I've not had spare time since our training to work on a full data story as such. Although I do hope to continue some work on an infographic on shag migration data from the Isle of May. This data shows residents and migrants have different survival over winter. So that could create an interesting data story to tell, and I hope to find a portion of time to spend on it. But I use the idea of that project within our workshops to come up with the concept design that is shown here. So this is just some of the little things that we did in our workshops, and that's where I created the seabird illustrations that you see here, the puffin and the shag, and they were just created in Infinity Designer during one of Peter's workshops. So, you know, it's an incredibly intuitive software to pick up, and you can do quite nice illustrations really quite simply. But despite not managing to tell a data story as yet, I've been able to use a lot of the training and skills that we learned in the workshops within my everyday role. And so I thought I'd just share some of that with you today. So a little less science than everyone else, but a few more pretty pictures. Next slide, please, Helen. So the first one I wanted to share with you is, we've touched on this already in Tom's slides, is using the skills to bring graphs into your communications and just adjust them to better fit that publication or to be more easily interpretable. So this is my interpretation of a graph for a policy brief for the ABLE project. And here I took the graph supplied into the design software, into Infinity, was able to change the fonts to suit the publication and recolor it to fit the color palette, which was for Butterfly Conservation Europe. So here the original Excel or R graph is on the left, and my version on the right, and then where it sits in the page of the policy brief, just shown below on the full page. Next slide, please, Helen. And here's a second one, using an original graph that came from Excel. This one looking very similar to the example that Peter's just shown us. And on the left-hand side is my interpretation of it. And as this is this is to illustrate the roles of the staff at UKCEH, and it's for our new UKCEH People Strategy publication. So again, I took the original graph supplied, popped it into Infinity, changed the fonts, changed the colours to fit the corporate colour palette. Another thing I did was I changed the colours subtly to illustrate the proportion of science staff to other staff by using the blue hues for science roles and then the grey for the other professional management, IT services and support staff. And I just felt that better illustrated the overall makeup of our staff and told the story of us being a science organisation. So again, the original on the left, the new on the right, and where it fits in the page of our publication. And this graph also actually nicely showcases two of the take-home messages that I gained from Peter's training on graphs in particular, that he's already touched on actually, is to integrate the key and also label the data. And even something as simple as making all the labels horizontal. And this makes the graph much easier for the reader to interpret at a glance. So I think that just neatly illustrates those take-home messages that we all picked up. The next slide, please, Helen. This is looking at infographics, and an infographic, I've moved my notes on again, sorry. So again, this was also for the policy brief for the ABLE project, Butterfly Conservation Europe, where they wanted an infographic produced from a little list of, I think, 8 or 10 numbers supplied in a Word document. And it had to fit into the policy brief leaflet that I was designing for them. So I've created this infographic from scratch, designing it to fit into the leaflet. So using the Butterfly Conservation Europe colour palette and the same fonts and the way that it flows at the bottom. And so there is the infographic and showing it in its in situ within its full page. Next slide, please, Helen. And then another infographic that I've created recently. You see, I've been quite busy with my infographics and graphs since our training. This is for the UKCEH annual review publication, which will be published in March, actually. So you're getting a bit of a sneak preview. Again, creating an infographic from scratch, from a list of numbers, designing it specifically for the publication that it's going to go in. So I've used the circular motif that runs throughout and again alongside the UKCEH colour palette and fonts. And this goes across a double A4 page spread. Actually, that's just shows it laid out in its double page spread. And my final slide, please, Helen. So we're very keen as an organisation to bring our data to life, and we welcome that scientists are learning how to do that. And you know, it's really exciting, and it's been really stimulating and exciting to be part of this training and to see the data stories coming to life firsthand. However, this process does also present us with some challenges as a comms team, as we want to ensure a consistent look and feel across our publications and our communications. So we're addressing this through updates to our brand guidelines that all staff will be able to access. And how can you do that? You can visit our brand room where you can download our corporate logos and our colours. And we'll soon be launching our brand book. That'll be coming in the next month or so. And there will be our corporate visual identity guidelines. Or you can contact the comms team directly via CEH comms at ceh.ac.uk. And so that is my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Heather. That was a really excellent presentation, and I've had the great pleasure of working with Heather on a number of projects over quite a number of years now, including exhibitions and celebrations of 50 years of the Biological Record Centre, and it's just always an absolute delight to work with you, Heather, and your work is just amazing. So, and that's been replicated in the chat with many people praising your wonderful designs there. So thank you for that excellent presentation, Heather. And I'm going to hand over to Peter to talk about it.
Well, hello, Heather. Congratulations on all your marvelous work, and it's absolutely brilliant to work with organisations sometimes when we have this opportunity to bring people like yourself from the comms team in to muck in with the researchers, and it was so great to have you around on the project for that reason. But I think there's a lot of value, those of you who are working in institutions, to create these kind of collaborations in training and also events where you can bring together different teams who wouldn't normally work together so directly in the same kind of training sessions, and see what they can learn from each other. Because it's really fantastic to hear how Heather learned so much, you know, from me, but also from her research colleagues around her as well, when we're going through. So I think there's a lot of value in that. As we were saying a moment ago, it was really interesting, Heather, to see your slide with the pie charts and to show how it sort of comes through, and then the kind of treatments that you do on it. And I think again that hopefully makes the point that I was making earlier about not just sticking with the norm and assuming that it's best practice because it's the default, and working through. The other thing that was a big feature of your work that I just want to pick up on, and Tom just made a note of this in the chat as well, is that you're very good with icons, and icons are so useful for telling visual stories, and creating meaning. And I just want to, if you don't mind for a moment, Helen, can I just pick up the share? Is that all right, just temporarily?
Yes, no problem at all. I'll just unshare this and we'll go back again. Oops, sorry, I lost the stop share. There we are. There we go.
Fantastic. So just to give everybody a brief indication of some of the resources that we were using. So we were using sites like Flaticon to have a look at different concepts. They're really good for inspiration. Even if you don't want to use the particular icons that are there, you can download all of these as vector formats. Very similarly, we have the noun project. Here we go, and you can just search and download fabulous icons. So if you're not you know, very good at designing these things yourself, then you can access them. It doesn't stop there. There are specialist libraries like PhiloPic, where you can go in, and it's based on a taxonomy, so you can go in and be very scientific with these kind of silhouettes and contribute to that as well if you get into your design work. And there are amazing resources in really surprising places. So Wikimedia has loads of SVG maps, loads of vector maps that you can download and use, and flags and all sorts of things. So there are lots of resources out there. On the image library side, we've got things like Unsplash, and you can, you know, search for various topics in here and find some wonderful images that you can use in your presentations and to tell stories yourself. So have a look out there, but good icon design is tricky. My biggest recommendation with icon design is never let the icon be alone. Captioning it or putting it into context is really important, because I think that what one person sees in an icon isn't necessarily the same as what other people see. And this goes for all graphics in a way. Words are really, really important. I see some people get into the design of infographics and think, well, I mustn't use words. And actually, there are some journals who say don't use any words in your visual abstracts, which just completely blows my mind. Because without words, we have no context, but words and pictures together, we have a lot of meaning. Good. So well done, Heather. That's absolutely terrific.
You know, it's beautiful, isn't it? And I think so. Heather also designed the UKSCAPE logo. So just to point that out as well, and indeed a number of other logos as well. And I like the way on this infographic, the way that sort of I record type symbol, the little dragonfly is captured in by that 1.77 million. It's just really beautiful details when you look at these things. And there's been a lot of comments in the chat about different sites to have a look for pictures, logos, and just in case anybody else, we were laughing on the course because the flat icon, many of us read as flaticon. So if you were also doing the same, just to share that reminded me of that moment in the course. Anthea makes a very good point about checking the terms and conditions for icons and images when you look through them. I don't know if you picked out anything more, Peter or Heather, from the comments that you would like to address before we move to the next presentation. But lots of praise again, and yeah, it's certainly really, really beautiful, and not only really beautiful, but telling really wonderful stories. So yeah, thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you.
Thank you again. We'll switch sharing screens.
Yes.
I'll go back to the shared screen. Can you see, am I back on the screen again? Oh no, I haven't pressed share. Right, there we are. Hopefully you can see it now. Is this back to Heather's creating infographics? Great. So next up we have Andy, and Andy's going to take us through a presentation on acid rain. So over to you, Andy.
Hi there. Yes, so I'm Andy Sire from UKCEH, and unlike the previous two speakers, so I'm not really a trained scientist. Well, I mean, I did a PhD many years ago, but I haven't had a scientific career since then, unlike Tom. And I'm not a professional graphic designer like Heather, so I've got big acts to follow here. But I'm keen on visual communication and graphic design, and enjoy doing that as part of my job. So the course was really great. And for the final project piece in my course, I decided to try to tell the story of acid rain and the recovery from acid rain using some data that I knew I could get hold of fairly easy. So what I'm going to show here is work in progress. It's not finished yet. And someone mentioned earlier about doing stuff, mocking stuff up on paper first. So I haven't got that in my slides, but if you can see the camera, just to show that I did do some mock-ups and thinking on paper first. And then that took me into the, helped me to then carry that through in Affinity Designer. So next slide, please, Helen. So the idea of this piece was to try to tell the story of acid rain and the recovery from acidification in pictorial, in visual form, using some words, but very much a pictorial piece. I wanted to present some data, particularly from the Environmental Change Network, which relates to acidification. And I wanted to try to design something that I could use flexibly in different outlets, and I'll demonstrate some of that towards the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. And I tried to think about the audiences and decided to focus this piece on an audience of sort of upper secondary school students, sort of 14, 16-year-olds. And sorry, Peter, but yeah, the general public, obviously, in the sense that non-academics, non-scientists, people that were generally interested in the subject but didn't have necessarily the scientific background. And so I wanted the piece to be able to capture their attention and give that general overview, and then it would be put in. I could see it being used, if we did use it, within the context of more information being available, so people could follow links to further reading and the data if they wanted it, and so on. So that was the thinking behind it, and perhaps thinking that it might be used in an educational context. Okay, next slide, please. So what I tried to do was to create a series of images, of slides or panels that take you through the story sequentially. So you can see that there are 9 here. I might develop more. There's some more data that I could visualize. So this may expand to be more than 9, but as I say, this is work in progress. So, but instantly you can kind of get the feel for what I tried to produce. Quite colourful here. So I'm not going to show all the slides, but I'll just show a few to illustrate a few elements of the design, or my thinking around design. So next slide, please. So I tried to use bright colours, bold colours, simple cartoon-like images that are sort of made with vector shapes, and use gradients and transparency. So all these are sort of things you can do easily within Affinity Designer. Next slide, please. I tried to highlight key words. I realized that I couldn't really tell the story purely in graphics alone. I needed some text, but I didn't want too much text, and I thought it'd be quite good to pick out certain key things so that maybe these stick in people's brains. I don't know if that does work as a tool, but I hoped it might work as a way of just bringing out some elements of the story. So next slide, please. So you can see again there's where I've highlighted some of the words, and also I've used where I've got a few slides where there are quite a lot of text in different sections. I've tried to use to guide the read around. So in here using numbers. I did play at one point with linking them with lines, but I switched to using numbers. I guess there's different ways of doing that. Okay, and the next slide, please. So we talked a bit about how much time it takes to do these things earlier, and it did take quite a lot of time to design some of the graphic elements. I drew them all myself in Affinity Designer, which I must say, I mean, I was new to that software until Peter introduced us to it, but I found it really, I have had some experience of Adobe Illustrator, but I found Affinity Designer really, really easy to pick up, and actually I much prefer it to Illustrator for a lot of things. And although it takes time to create these graphics initially, once you've done them you can then reuse them in a lot of different ways. So you probably see that on the slides that I've done, that different elements are being reused. Okay, next slide, please. So in terms of visualization, this is the one graph that I've got in there at the moment, but like I say, I will add more. This is quite simple data that I had available, showing the decline in sulfate concentration. So that's the acid rain, that we're measuring over a time period of about 20 years. So that's what I came up with. And if you go to the next slide, I'll just show some of the things I had to think about. So there's actually data coming from more than one site around the UK. So I had to decide, do I show all 4 lines separately or just average them into one? I decided that for simplicity, it would be better just to show an average, because the trends are all much the same. So let's just average them and show that decline. That's the key thing, that there's a decline going on here. Do I link them with a line or keep them separate? Here I decided to keep them separate because technically they're independent data points. So, but I guess you could still have a line connecting them. Do I show error bars? That was a pretty easy one. No, I decided we didn't need error bars. Should I label the y-axis with the units, which is pretty complex, micro equivalents per litre? Well, I thought, for the audience, do I really need that? No, I'll just call it sulfate concentration, and that's enough. And how to link it to the visual theme? Well, as you can see, I played around. I put some of the graphics I'd used subtly in the background, and used the raindrop symbol, which I've used throughout a lot of the slides as the data points. And again, I've kind of got a gradient going through. Hopefully the yellow subtly indicates that there's loads of sulfur in there, and you lose the yellow as you go down. So next slide, please. There's more data to include. So for example, there's this plot that I could use on the top left there, which is quite complex. So I've just been thinking about how I might make that simpler to convey the message in the bottom right. This is just, as I say, work in progress at the moment. But the idea is to try to show that these are all plant species, and the ones on the left in that dark coloured box, some of them are going up in abundance as acid rain is declining. And the acid tolerant ones, they're not changing very much. But there's an annoying outlier, which these are the complications that you have to deal with, I suppose. And as a non-scientist, could be tempted just to slide that line, that division, over to the right to include that one in the left side instead of the right-hand group. But is that technically, scientifically valid to do? So for me, I have to work with scientists. I can't just do this sort of thing on my own. And the next slide, please. And I said that the sort of eventual uses of this, I'm envisaging that could use these different panels as a sort of slideshow on a website, but also the layout. The thinking of having them in that landscape formatted rectangle is that they could work quite well on a smartphone, either when it's held portrait or turned over on its side, so you can see them nicely on a smaller screen. And the next slide, please. Okay, and that's it for me.
That was fantastic. Thank you very much, Andy. Really, really beautiful. I think your graphics are amazing, and I liked the reoccurrence of the raindrop throughout. I thought that was beautiful. So yeah, really fantastic. I'm going to hand over to Peter, and I'll flick through the chat to see if there's any more comments.
Great. Yeah, well done, Andy. Absolutely terrific, because we've already discussed. But can you tell us a little bit about the inspiration for the style that you've created? Because it's really distinctive, this kind of gradients and transparencies and things like that. Where did you get the idea to create it in that way?
Like I said before, aiming at the audience, I felt something bright and colourful work would to grab attention. I've seen other pieces of work. I can't sort of pick them, but I've been conscious, I think, sort of behind, subconsciously aware of that kind of style of what do you call it, flat art, and sort of, and the gradients. And in a lot of them I put a slight element of noise in there, so there's a little bit of graininess in the grainy texture as well. Yeah, and I just like the look, that particular look, and I felt it worked quite well. It works quite well with the simple vector shapes that you can create, I think, and with some of the things like the shape of the map of Europe, I was able to sort of tweak it and skew it a little bit so that it looks slightly like you're looking down on it from an angle, and so there were little sort of things like that that made me aim towards that particular design.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely terrific.
Slightly fun, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's really, really engaging. And what I want to pick up on a couple of points that you made just to reinforce them for everybody watching today. You talk quite a lot about reusing the graphics, both in between the different elements as you move from slide to slide, but also then you're talking about this slide that we're looking at here. And I've known some people who've been very successful in creating their own kind of image libraries over time that you can then reuse for all your posters, all your presentations, any kind of graphics that you're putting together. And a software like Affinity, also, you know, Illustrator and Inkscape, maybe, I'm not sure, have kind of library functions so that you can create your own kind of asset libraries that you can use again and again. I had a fish ecologist do a training course with me a couple of years ago, and he created a library of, I think, about 200 different fish species in Affinity. He really should open source it at some point. But he then, whenever he needed a particular vector illustration of a fish as part of his research, he could then just go in and kind of use it. So I think that was really interesting. And one more thing I just want to pick up on is that you did talk about your audience quite a lot, which is fantastic. And I forgive you for saying the words general public. It's fine. But I think what's really interesting is that you talked a couple of times about how you used your perceptions of your target audience to make decisions about the design. And that's what I want other people to take away from what you said, in that sense, that if you do profile your audience in some way, even if you just spend a few minutes doing it, then you're answering to somebody in the decisions that you're making further down the line when you're trying to decide whether or not, you know, you're going to put the grid in the background and whether or not you're going to put the units on the axes and those sorts of things. You have somebody to answer to, and that's really, really important. So thank you, Andy, that was great.
Yeah, it was really wonderful. And Alice Hope makes an excellent point about the way in which you considered not only the audience, but also the device and platform that you could then view it on, as we can see here with the eventual use. That's really fantastic as well. And it's just those simple reminders as well around the numbers, when you said about having the numbers rather than the arrows to show the sequence around your visualization. I've just been working on a visualization where I've been trying to add arrows in the most cumbersome crisscrossing manner. And of course, all I have to do is go back to numbers. So it's about having those simple reminders and thoughts as well. Really wonderful presentation. So thank you very much for that. And yeah, lots of compliments again within the chat. So thank you very much for that, Andy, and for your comments too, Peter. I think we will move on to our next speaker. Oh, there was all of them together. And next up we have Vicky, if you're there, Vicky.
Hi, Helen.
Hi, Vicky, lovely to see you. I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much. Hi, everybody. I'm Vicky Bell. I'm a modeller at UKCEH, and I've very much enjoyed the course we did on visualization and tried to use it to help us with some papers we're writing at the moment. So next slide, please. So what we were hoping to do for some publications we're writing was to come up with a simple diagram to actually communicate the process we followed in a piece of research. In the research itself, we compiled new data sets, we took lots of complex information, made it simpler, and then we used it in our model to actually do some science and show us what could happen with different abstraction and discharge scenarios in the future, on how river flows might change in the future. And we wanted it to be just a figure in the paper labeled a model schematic. So what I wanted to get across was the process, not just the data and not the results. I sort of wanted to show a travelling of ideas, and ideally that we started off with something complex and simplified it. So who's it for? Well, it could be for another scientist reading the manuscript, or presentation to quite a wide range of audiences. I do find if you get a reasonably good visual representation of your science, it travels far and wide. So I'm always mindful that happens. But also to help co-authors communicate the modelling science clearly, maybe in other projects or to their colleagues. Thank you. Next slide, please. So what's the science we're trying to communicate? We wanted to communicate how we've used very complex abstraction and discharge data sets, how we've simplified them, turned them into simple grids, and then demonstrated how they can be used to improve the performance of a national scale hydrological model. And I wanted to explain this process visually without getting stuck on any of the details. Because previously when we were trying to think about this, we got stuck on the details. So we've got data sets, abstraction and abstraction and discharge, and we've also got to try and represent the model itself, but also show what on earth it's for. Why are we doing this in the first place? So the game was to do this all rather nicely visually. Next slide, please. So I started off by using Affinity software to make a sort of 3D landscape of how I work. And I use this a lot in my work. I've used something similar to this for about 10 years. And I originally drew it in Microsoft Word, which was a nightmare. And the original picture's been getting older and older ever since. And it was about time it got updated. So I tried to improve it and redraw it. And I rather suspect, well, I've already used this in several pieces of work. So this course has been amazing because it has revitalized some very old visuals. It shows the Affinity, in case people are asking about Affinity, it shows what Affinity looks like. It does look like lots of knobs and dials, but Peter took us through what each of them did. And I also learned how to use layers. I'm sorry, you can't see very well, but on the bottom right, it shows you all the layers that you stack up so you can switch different aspects of your drawing on and off. And I found that really helpful because I kept changing my mind about what was important. So that was useful. Next slide, please. So my first attempt, I feel I'm a bit embarrassed showing this after seeing all the previous wonderful, fabulous work that people have shown, but this is my first attempt at showing the process. I think it's probably a little bit busy. For some reason, I thought a nice grey background would be good. I think that was having seen what other people did, but I think on balance, there was too much going on there. I tried to show how there was a passage of complexity from the left to the right, getting simpler and simpler, and tried to keep the colours consistent. It was quite a useful thing that Peter emphasised, was maintaining colours all the way through and not just hopping about all the time. The little line graph on the bottom left, on the bottom right, sorry, was supposed to represent a hydrograph, and I had a couple of versions of this, and all the feedback I got was that if any hydrologists were immediately sort of thinking hard about it and what it meant, and I had a second one there as well, and they got confused, and I thought, no, I'm just going to do away with that. So I followed the feedback and thought, last thing I wanted is people getting hung up on what that shows. It was just supposed to be representative. So next slide, please. So in the final schematic, I'm really sorry, Tom, about the drop shadow. I'm trying to emphasize it. The last picture, I simplified it, I cut out some of the colours, and I ended up just showing a bit of a river and trying to demonstrate how we want to understand how abstraction in the future could impact on river flows across Britain. And I just drew a happy little fish, and I took some of the colours out of the fish and tweaked the colours elsewhere to try and get a consistent visual picture. Okay, next slide, please. So what I took away from the course, the design software was really great, and I learnt what layers were for the first time. I've always been a bit baffled by them. One thing I realised is that before you start drawing, you really do have to think hard. If you want to simplify your science, you do the thinking first, and that took me ages. And I'm really glad I did, because even though what I've produced is still complex, it's a lot simpler than what it was before. Consistent colours and palette. We've mentioned the PDF could be imported and manipulated. And the basic schematics I produced are being used all over the place, well, certainly by me, and I imagine they'll be used by others. And the final thing I took away was I enjoyed it so much, the course, that I'm doing an online design and creativity course in my spare time. So thank you, Peter, for that. Next, please. Next slide, please. As for the science, the most important part, we've submitted the journal manuscript. It's led by my colleague Ramesh. Use of abstraction and discharge data to improve the performance of a national scale hydrological model. The data themselves are, they were quite hard to use. They're available under an Environment Agency licence conditions. We're actively investigating ways in which we can publish what we've made out of them. They come with lots of privacy regulations, and we do have to abide by that. But we're constantly trying to work our way around ways in which we can publish them while obeying the licence conditions. And finally, as I say, I've used what we learned quite a lot, various other things, and this just shows diagrams and visual abstracts I've been doing lately. So it's really taken off, thank you. Final slide. That's all from me. Thank you for listening, and over to Peter and Helen.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Vicky. And I think it's a really wonderful graphic and not overly complicated. And I like the colour following through. I can see that really clearly, and that the fish draws through the colours as well. Really appeals to me. I think it's wonderful. So handing it over to you, Peter, and then I'll look through the comments in the chat.
I love a good fish drawing, Vicky, as you know. I think fish are so. If anybody else has ever fancies, taking on a little design project for themselves, drawing fish is a great place to start. It's a lot of fun. You get some really nice results very, very quickly. Takeaways from what you're saying, Vicky. One of the things that we've had some insight into here is the kind of iterative process that is so useful in our design work, and actually knowing that you can use the software to help you with that kind of iterative process, and you're creating a version, you're evaluating it, you're testing it, you're moving on to the next one. And not only that, because it's then flowing through your work over time, you're gradually improving it over time as you start using it in kind of other environments and for other pieces of work as well. So what I'd really like other people to take away from that is that it's really important to invest in that time, to be iterative, and to allow yourself to complete a draft, sleep on it, come back to it, talk to some colleagues, and you should expect to go through a few different versions before you really get something that communicates really, really well, which is a very challenging point of view for those of us who are very time poor. So it's actually maybe just about breaking up your time a little bit, rather than spending one day kind of madly working on everything, getting to deadline and hitting send at the end of the day. Maybe just taking a couple of hours out of that to spread out with some feedback and to create some different versions. Yeah, I mean, the layer process is really important in design software. So for those of you who haven't used it, using layers allows us to kind of instigate this method of atomic design, where we've got little objects which are our kind of atoms, and then we group them together into molecules, and then those molecules group together into compounds, and you really have to kind of label things and organize things and do good work in that sense. So it's really helpful though when you set it up properly, because it means you can just take something out, bring something back in really, really quickly. You can have a look at it like this, like that, and it just enables that kind of decision-making process. And yeah, just a final point, I'm so pleased to hear that you're continuing on with your design work and putting it to good use, and doing a creativity course as well. So lovely to hear. Thanks, Vicky.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, thank you both. And again, compliments within the chat. There's mention around, and I think it comes very well from your presentation, Vicky, around the reuse of drawings as well, and the way in which a good drawing can then be used in lots of different ways. And a suggestion that maybe we should have a UKCEH access library of shapes, an open access library of shapes, which is a really good idea. And we can see how many have been created already just from this afternoon. And yeah, Heather as well, you get the endorsement from Heather. She likes how you took the colour scheme across the whole thing as well. So yeah, really excellent. And thank you very much for that, Vicky. It was great being on the course with you as well. Thank you. Great. So next up, we have Katie Smith, and Katie is here with her UKCEH background, which is excellent as well. So over to you, Katie. Thank you very much.
There we go. Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself and it wasn't reacting, so I had a panic. So the first little example I wanted to show you today is from the actual course we had on visual storytelling, and this was a butterflies population. So Peter already showed you a couple of slides on this task, where we were just given this text file and asked to translate this into an infographic. I should say I'm a hydrologist. I'm not an ecologist, so butterflies are not really what I normally work on, but they're beautiful, and I snapped it up as an opportunity to work with a very attractive subject matter. So this was about the population changes in butterflies in 2019, and what I instantly thought in my head was, oh, I can imagine these little like trails of butterflies as they've flown across, and some are going up and some are going down. So I did this little sketch of that, and then I thought, oh, that kind of looks a bit like the sort of, you know, the ridges in a butterfly's wings. It could be, you know, a bit leaf-like. So I designed this around that, and then I wanted to add a bit more about the story and a call to action on the right-hand side. So I did that little sketch that you can see on the left there, and then I went into Affinity and I started drawing that up in Affinity. And what I quickly decided was that rather than just having simple bubbles to show the values, I wanted to add little butterfly outlines. So next slide, please. And so then this is what emerged out of the end of it. A couple of other people had that were doing this at the same time as me had clipped out real butterfly photos into butterfly shapes, and I thought that was stunning. So I cribbed that idea from them and incorporated that into my design. I changed the colours, and yeah, and then I added these infographics that I designed on the right hand side. I grabbed a couple of some little icons from websites, but I then drew a little tractor because I couldn't find a tractor that was in the right angle and everything. So I drew that one from scratch and then popped it on the top. And so yeah, that was my butterfly exercise for the design course that we were on, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was really good. I didn't get time to go away and play with UK-SCAPE data subsequently. It's still on my to-do list, but I thought I would share with you some other examples of posters that I've done in recent years at UKCEH. I go to EGU and AGU quite often and present my scientific research there. So I've done quite a few posters, and I've done a lot of agonising about how to design a poster and Googling around and finding good tips. So I thought I'd share with you a couple of things. Even though I learned these things a while ago, I thought I'd show you and see what you think of them. So next slide, please. And the next one. So this was quite a while ago. This was some NERC-funded research as part of the UK Drought and Water Scarcity Programme, and it was looking at cascades of uncertainty, of how the further you go in a modelling chain, the more uncertainty you get, the more things you add into the modelling, and the more the wide-ranging your results can be. And this was something that Ed Hawkins from Reading University had published on, and he drew this little graph on the left-hand side that you can see the cascade of uncertainty in the climate results. And I thought, oh, well, I'm applying this to hydrology. How can I not make this an actual cascade? How can I not represent this as actual water in a cascade going down a waterfall? So I did this in PowerPoint, unbelievably, and it absolutely broke me. It took a whole week to do that little graphic there. So subsequently, I'm very happy that I've found better programs to do this. But yeah, so that was my first example, and that graphic then made it into a paper where I expanded on the theory in a bit more detail. So it was really worth doing. Next slide, please. And so this was a really nice little story that I told it for an EGU poster. Again, this was part of the UK Drought and Water Scarcity Programme. And I was doing, it was a really boring subject matter. It was about model calibration. How do you calibrate a model? And I was using this really complex method of calibrating a model when actually I could have used a really simple method of doing it. And I wanted to explain to people, why would I go through all this rigmarole of doing it this way when I could have done it really easily? And I thought, well, this is a really boring story. How can I make this more interesting? And I scratched my head for a few days, and I came up with this. The saying about making mountains out of molehills, you know, making something more difficult than it needs to be. So I grabbed that and I took that forwards into my poster. So my poster had this nice little picture of a mole on it and some mountains in the background, just for emphasis. And so something I learned along the way while doing posters was you really need to have this kind of grabbing image somewhere that fills quite a lot of the space of your picture, of your poster. You don't want to have just loads and loads of writing and graphs, although this one's not great. It's quite a lot of writing and graphs. But you need something that's going to grab people's attention, and I thought this little mole would grab people's attention. So yeah, I think the lesson I've learned from posters is be willing to sacrifice quite a large amount of your space just to grab people's attention. It doesn't necessarily have to tell them anything informative, even if it just makes them stop and look at your poster. At least they've stopped and looked at your poster. I think anyone in science who's been to any of these conferences goes into these airport hangar sized rooms full of posters, and they all look the same. They're all just graphs and writing, and they're really boring. So it's a really good opportunity to do something interesting and capture people's attention. Next slide, please. And yeah, again, this is the last one that I'll show you. It's another example of another poster that I've done recently, and this one is UK-SCAPE data, although it's not badged as such because the research was done under hydrojoules, and that research has now been put into UK-SCAPE. It's part of the Hydrological Outlook UK, so this is the operational forecasting we do, streamflow forecasting that we do every month. And over winter now, we've included this NAO analog prediction method, which is about how different atmospheric drivers can influence the rainfall patterns in the UK, and how we can then use that forwards in our streamflow projections. So what I did here was I thought, well, nobody's going to understand my poster at all if they don't understand the NAO and how that influences the UK. So I wanted to dedicate a really big amount of space on my poster to letting people understand that concept. So I went away and I thought about how I could display this on a map, and I thought, oh, that's boring. And then I thought, okay, well, actually, if I zoom out, and I looked at Google Earth, if I zoom out and show it from a higher perspective, then you could see the arrows going through into how that affects the UK. And then I thought, well, it's nice to view this from space, so I then made the rest of the background of the poster black, as if we're traveling in space. Something as well about colours that I've tried to use. The colours in my posters are often quite similar, and that's because what I did once a couple of years ago was I went away and I picked up the UKCEH turquoisey colour, and I put it in a website that looks at the colour wheel, and it showed me the 3-point triad colours that would go with and complement really nicely with the UKCEH turquoise colour, and it was this kind of orangey colour and purpley colour. So I've integrated those sort of contrasting colours and checked that they're colourblind friendly where necessary if it's important, and yeah, integrated those in a lot of my posters where I can. So yeah, those are the lessons that I've learned. Basically, I would encourage those of you that do posters to, as I've said, sacrifice a large amount of your area, because you really want to grab people's attention, and that's important over cramming in as much information as you possibly can. So yeah, that's all I had to say today.
Thank you very much, Katie. That was really excellent. And comments in the chat such as awesome poster, and these might be some of the best posters I've seen, inspiring, and people agreeing on that, grabbing that eye-catching graphic that you've included being really working very well. So yeah, lots of positive comments. I'll hand over to Peter. Thank you very much, Katie.
Yeah, hi Katie, terrific presentation. I just want to pick up on a couple of things that I've noticed across your work and the things that you've just shown. You've very often got calls to action, which a lot of people don't put on their design work. And this is a marketing concept, really, the call to action. You're saying, you know, follow me on Twitter. You're saying, scan this QR code and go off to here and join my citizen science projects. And all these sorts of things are extremely important. It's worth spelling out, folks, all of you, if you have a desired action that you would like people to undertake after they've read your content or looked at your infographic or your poster, then make it plain and simple for them. Give them a link to the paper, give them a link to the projects, and just make sure that it's there. Of course, it's easy to Google things and find that information out for yourself, but if you can just suggest to people in a very polite way that they should do something about what they've just learned, then action ensues and impact ensues. So that's all really good. The other thing that I think you do really well in your poster work is you integrate your data viz so nicely into your design work, and this is really important. Very often I see posters and infographics where the data viz is copied and pasted in. It's in a white box. It doesn't have the same color scheme as the rest of the poster, and I can see that you work really, really hard on that, and I think it really, really pays off. And just touching on what you said about how to find, you know, the creative in what you do, and I think when I'm working with people training in poster design, I ask people to sort of leave room to be creative, but you can come to it definitely after you've put everything else in and made all of the kind of technical information and written information really efficient and tidy. And then you can look at what space you've got to be creative. And very often, once you've done that, the big idea arrives, I think, and the kind of those hooky ideas appear in. I just wanted to come back on a couple of questions that have come up in the chat during Katie's presentation as well. In that, you know, Ingo's wondering where to start. You know, Katie did such a wonderful job of drawing that tractor, and it integrated really nicely with the other icons and things, didn't it? It was done exactly in that same style. And I'd follow Heather's advice in the chat, which is to start, just think about geometric shapes. Once you know this, it's a big design secret. You start looking at geometric shapes, they're there. You know, if we look at this cloud here and this sun, you know, we've just got some circles kind of stuck together. And if you learn that process of illustration, anybody can do that. Anybody can learn how to stick geometric shapes together in a way that creates meaning and creates iconography and creates illustrations. A word of caution, there will always be somebody that you look up to, whatever your design skill, there'll always be somebody else that you'll look and go, their work is really amazing, I could never do anything like that. And that's true of me as it is for Katie with her posters. There's probably other posters that she's seen. I don't know, Katie, how modest are you? But always,
I'm looking at Heather's work very, very jealously.
Well, there you go. So, you know, design jealousy is always there. It's really important not to let that hold you back. When I was working in managing a design studio, we had a really, really fantastic illustrator, John, who had an illustration degree. You could ask him to draw anything in any style, you know, an anime badger or something like that, and he would just be able to do it. He wasn't always the most appropriate illustrator for every job. Sometimes we needed a simpler approach, and we needed something that was more sort of approachable and more intuitive to other people. So you can find a way. We also had a comment from Anthony about finding collaborators, and I think this is really, really interesting and useful. You mentioned a couple of platforms, Upwork and Fiverr. I'm afraid I'll say something slightly negative about those platforms, that I find them quite exploitative of young designers and designers in developing nations around the world, crowdsourcing logos and things like that. I wouldn't recommend it. It's perfectly possible, and it can meet a budget. So my advice is to up your skills, or to find, you know, invest in a collaborator. Find a freelance designer who you can meet up with outside of lockdown and have a coffee and talk things over, and invest in them and get them to understand what you're trying to communicate. And you can still work on a very small budget, but you can create a more positive effect in the world by doing it that way. So yes, good. Okay, that's it for me. That's it for me this time.
Great.
I should just say with my tractor, I say I made it from scratch, but that did involve lots of Googling of similar tractor images and real tractor photos to try and work out what it would look like from that angle and things. So it's never really from scratch. You're always taking slight ideas from other people to get to where you want to be in the end. And I also went back to Illustrator the other day, Adobe Illustrator, having been on Affinity, and I hated every minute of it. If it just the way you can crop, you can crop an image to another image is outline with like one slide of your mouse in Affinity, and I couldn't find it at all in Illustrator. It took me ages to remember where the button was.
Well, thank you very much, Katie, and your designs are really beautiful. And there was a comment from Vicky and also from Steve Thackeray there as well, around the sort of movement and flow within your posters and the cascade. And I think that is there in all of your graphics, and even with this font on this final design, the spreading their wings, it's kind of the movement of butterflies making that text, and it's really fantastic. So thank you very much, Katie. I'm going to move forward to the next slide, and Sue Rennie is going to take us through her presentation. Over to you, Sue.
Hello. Hello, everybody. It's been really inspiring, this webinar, seeing everybody's amazing work. Can we move on to the next slide, please? I'm going to talk about something slightly different. It's about collecting user requirements for an IT project and communicating that within a project. Can we have the next slide, please? So the project I'm going to talk about is ELTA. This isn't actually a UK-SCAPE project, but the UK-ECM that Andy talked about earlier is the UK representation on ELTA. And ELTA is a across European network to collect long-term environmental monitoring data. It's across 26 countries in Europe. We've got 250 research sites, and there's a bigger pool of sites that can be used as well. and the sort of data we're collecting goes across many different fields, so atmosphere, biosphere. You can see that on the graphic, but I think probably one of the USPs for ELTA is we also look at the human environment interaction. So we're looking at social and economic data as well. Can we have the next slide, please? Thanks, Helen. My role on ELTA is working on the IT side of things. So we're building the architecture to help deliver ELTA. So the current round of the ELTA funding is to build. It's a 5-year project, and at the end of it, we're hoping that we'll be able to establish a legally recognised research infrastructure. So we need a really robust IT architecture that can support that. We definitely have parts in place, and then there's other parts like in the left-hand corner that haven't been built yet. So we wanted to collect some user feedback to help us do that. Also, this graphic illustrates we've got a wide user community. We have site people that are putting data into it. We have research communities that are trying to get data out of it. And we have industry and also government users that are interested in our data. So I can have the next slide, please. So we were really keen to figure out what people wanted from the IT architecture and how we could deliver that. So we designed an interview process, and we talked to over 40 people. It was quite a long process. We talked to site people, we talked to data providers about what the sort of things, the problems that they're dealing with that they think ELTA could help them with, and also just to get a better feel for the sort of data they hold and how they want to interact with ELTA. So can I have the next slide, please? So after that interview process, we designed what we've called personas, and so Sandra is one of those. And they're not real people, but they are archetypes. They are people that we've designed out of that interview process to help us. So they tend to be quite exaggerated versions of a person, and they represent something that we can recognize in the interview that illustrates the sort of person that uses ELTA data or provides data to us. So we took these personas into one of the big project meetings, and we used Mural, which is an example here, which is like a whiteboard system. It's similar to Miro, which Peter mentioned earlier. Essentially, it's like a post-it session like you would do in a face-to-face meeting, but we were doing this online. We had over 100 people. So what we're asking them to do, we're calling it an empathy map. So we asked them to look at the architect and give us some idea of if they were that person, what would they do? What would they say? What would they think? And how would they feel? Next slide, please. So once we've got, and actually we were really reassured because all the ELTA community seemed very empathetic people, so that was lovely. And how we use that information was to design and create user stories. And these are elements that we think that we need to address within our IT architecture. So, and how you write use. So this first one here is, as a data provider, I want to take part in developing workflows and services so that they can keep being developed. And then, so we've set up, we've got over 40 user stories now. So we've combined them into if you know about the agile software development process, you'll know what I mean when I say epics. They are there are a larger subject area that can build that several user stories relate to. So as you can see, this has been a really can you hear me okay? Sorry, Siobhan. So as you can see, it's been a very involved process. This was all put together into a document. It's over 100 pages. As you can see in the top right, this for EPIC, it's section 4.2.2.2.2. So it's a really dense document, and I think you can probably appreciate how difficult that is to read. This sort of information, these user stories are invaluable for our IT developers, but it's really hard to communicate to the wider project people, community who are not IT developers. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So this is my visualization. It's very simple. I've been in an awe of my colleagues that have shown their visualizations before, and this is super simple. But I think that's the story, really. We had a huge, complex interview process, user feedback sessions. We've got a 100-page document, and I was able to boil it down into a very simple visualization. So we have these visualizations for each of the epics. There are 10 epics. And it just shows the key processes that we need to deliver into that epic, and it looks also at the dependencies between epics. So we know we need to deliver on epic 1 to be able to deliver this epic. So this has been a really useful way of communicating that 100-page document to the project, the research community. Affinity has been amazing to help me do that. Traditionally you would create these sort of software design documents in something called UML, which is really painful to use. Actually, one of my colleagues tried to do it for this information, and he spent over a day on it and gave up. He just couldn't do it. So I said, let me try it in Affinity, and I came up with this, and I was able to deliver them quite quickly. This color scheme is the ELTA colors. So these visualizations will fit neatly into ELTA presentations and ELTA reports because the branding is there already, and they just communicate really simply and easily. So yeah, that's me. I wanted to also thank all my colleagues on the course, but particularly Peter, because he spent a lot of time helping me with this sort of qualitative information. We spoke a lot in the course about, data sets and things like this, but this sort of qualitative information is difficult to know how to communicate. So I really appreciate Peter's help with helping me get my head around it. And I also feel like I've got a real workflow now that can help. I do a lot of this sort of stakeholder engagement. So I've got this workflow now that can help me collect information and communicate it effectively with people. So that's me. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Sue, and there's appreciation of the simple graphics in complex documents, and that's, yeah, for sure, you've turned something very complex into something very simple, and it's great to hear about the use of the colour through that as well. So thank you very much, Sue. Over to you, Peter.
It's absolutely fascinating, Sue. Thank you very much for providing those insights. And I think what we take away from Sue's talk is the importance of user experience in design. And there are, much better paid people than me who do an incredible amount of work on user experience design, using these kind of processes and boiling it down. The personas is brilliant. I mean, I advocate this to PhD students doing posters and things like that, that if they are thinking about general public, coming back to points that were made earlier on in the workshop, then actually coming up with some personas, even if you make them up from scratch. I mean, Sue's done an amazing job because she's got all these interviews, she's got this data, qualitative data to pour into those personas. But even if you just spend a little bit of time thinking up some personas and create these people that you can be answerable to in your design work, then it really, really helps. And yes, I've been through similar design processes myself with the NHS. I did a corporate restructure. We had a 100-page document of a corporate restructure information, which I was asked to visualize. And just the power of visualizing these kind of complex processes and ideas can very often produce insights, I think, as Sue has said. And in that particular example, when I was working on it, we actually found gaps in their restructure by trying to visualize what they were proposing, which will ultimately save people's jobs. So it's a very exciting process if you're into it, which I can tell Sue is. And yes, that rapid prototyping of visuals goes very nicely hand in hand with that kind of agile process of creating solutions and problem solving. So I'm really glad to hear all of that. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Peter. I think you're muted, Helen. Are you trying to?
I'm muted, you're right, Sue. Well, first, sorry I did that. I was about to also apologise for the Word document popping up. It was me checking our timetable that I had put onto a simple Word document so I could follow through what we're doing. But yeah, thank you very much for that, Sue. We're going to, because I've checked our programme, we're moving to our final presentation from this group around the visualizations before we come to our closing remarks from Jan. So thank you all very much for still being here with us. It's great that you're there and great to see all the comments still coming through on the chat. Please do keep chatting away. And I'm going to hand over to you now, Alison.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can. It's great. Thank you.
Great. Okay, go to the next slide, please. And the next one. Okay, so I'm working on UK-SCAPE Work Package 2.2, which is about water futures. And in there, we're driving the grid-to-grid hydrological model with both observed data and climate projection data from the UK Climate Projections 2018, which is an ensemble of data covering 1980 to 2080. And from those model runs, we've produced monthly mean river flows, annual maximum, annual minimum, and also some grids of soil moisture. Each of those is 1 kilometre grid across GB, and we've also got separate grids for Northern Ireland. And we're working on or have submitted some journal papers looking at future changes in seasonal mean flows, extreme river flows, so on. But I wanted to think about putting together some of the results from that into a relatively simple infographic to try and get across some of the results. So the audience I was thinking of, apologies to Peter again, was high-level policymakers and the general public, by which, same as Andy, I mean people who aren't scientists and don't necessarily think about any of this most of the time. And the main message would be that there are significant future changes possible in both seasonal mean river flows and extreme high and low flows. So the considerations were that I needed to simplify the results quite a lot from what I would present and how I would present things in a journal paper. But I wanted to retain the idea that the changes are quite uncertain and there's a lot of spatial variability. So I decided to show the minimum, median and maximum range over this 12-member climate ensemble, both nationally and for 6 regions of GB. So this was my very rough first attempt at it in Affinity, but mainly what this shows is how I was trying to split up the page into a sort of title and background information, and then the national summary results on the left, and then the regional summary results with a map on the right. But also I didn't want to use a sort of text on the x-axis, so I've used these symbols to pick out which set of results responds to which flow. So this is my final infographic, and the main refinements for this were I've added a plus sign to the water drop symbol for the high flows, because I realized that I needed to somehow be able to align the symbol with my plot underneath, but also it means it matches better with the low flow symbol. I simplified the sun symbol and changed the color a bit. Peter suggested adding some magenta into the color. I wasn't really used to thinking of cyan, magenta, yellow coloring, but that was really helpful. I changed the map colors to match the UKSCAPE logo colors and added some rivers to the map, since it's all about river flow. That seemed like a good idea. And Peter suggested color coding the regional plots by their corresponding map area. So I think that works really well. And I've also, like we said about trying to tell a story, I've added some text to draw out some of the features from results and used colored circles for that to sort of match the quarter circle of the titles. I think that helps to put it all together. That's all I had to say.
Thank you very much, Alison. I apologise, I wasn't moving through in the flow of your talk, but it was a wonderful presentation and really beautiful, captivating graphics. So thank you very much for that. Really wonderful. And yeah, lots of comments around liking the map colours coming out of the UKSCAPE logo, for instance. I think that's really beautiful as well. So yeah, it's really wonderful. Thank you, Alison. I'm going to hand over to Peter.
Yeah, just to agree with what Helen's saying, I think it's really innovative graphic, and I really like the presentation of it. The way that you've allowed the color scheme to kind of flow through it and create meaning, I think is extremely useful. But again, I'd just like to point out, and we've heard this point a couple of times by now, but the kind of iterative process that Alison's gone through here is really important in terms of making these improvements, thinking through these different ideas and spending that time just kind of making things a little bit better in lots and lots of different ways. Creates a very overall positive impression. So I congratulate you. Well done.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. So thank you very much for that, Alison. I'm going to move along because we're already at almost 4:20. It's been a wonderful afternoon seeing everyone's graphics, even more inspiring, and I had very high expectations, but it's been even more inspiring than I imagined it was going to be. So thank you all very, very much for that. I am now going to hand over to Jan, and Jan, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Jan is going to share her screen. But I just want to, while Jan's coming online and sharing her screen, to thank all of our presenters and for all of their work and for sharing their ideas and the processes that they've been through. It's been really fascinating to hear. And I think everyone, I hope, I certainly have gone away with a lot of useful reminders and ideas, and it's just been fantastic. So thank you all very much again, and to you, Peter, for your great comments. So we can see your screen, Jan. It's not in the slideshow mode, and we only have 10 minutes now, so I'm going to keep my closing remarks at the end quite short, but I look forward to Jan's presentation. Jan, you've disappeared again with the presentation.
Yeah, well, oops. To put it onto presentation mode, it flips to my second screen. So I am attempting to be clever.
Okay, well,
that's not easy.
Jan, if you go on the open book symbol rather than presentation mode,
she's there.
That should avoid that issue. If you go on the open book symbol next to the screen symbol, try that.
Thanks, Ingo. We can see it really clearly now, Jan. If you're happy with it, Jan, we're happy.
I am, but thanks for the knowledge, because I'll do that the next time instead of that fiddling around. But I appreciate time is of the essence. And I was asked to speak a little bit about the evaluation of the course. And the reason that's important is that this is all being funded by the UK-SCAPE project, which is a national capability project, which links nicely to what Helen told you in the beginning. So there was a lot of work done, and I'm only going to present a couple of bits about the evaluation of who attended, who was our target here, and then what they thought. So here I wanted to show that in UK-SCAPE we are looking at all different types of stakeholders, but this course was a good idea to try and see if we could link with the HEI community, the universities community particularly. And we found that they registered, but there was a little bit of a dropout with that. And perhaps that was suggested it was because it wasn't co-designed. And I think this is something that we'll have to take forward more, that the CEH people, UK-CEH people, stayed the course, excuse the pun, but that may be because of institutional loyalty. But I think it was a very, very good mix, and it's been spoken many times about how much we learned from each other during the course. The other thing that, going back to what Peter showed you, was there was the before and after kind of evaluation approach. So here's just a very simple graphic that I've nicked from the boards that were there, showing what people felt was their level of expertise in the beginning and what it was at the end, and people learned, which is good. Peter, it would be difficult to to have this presentation if they had not, but I think it's been really clear from the people who have spoken this afternoon how much they have learned. Also, Peter, they looked at the skills, particularly, did they agree or disagree that they'd improved? Communication, collaboration, and institution. And basically everybody's saying that the skills have improved. What is interesting, and it may influence or hark back to this issue about the HEIs, but whether my work, the work I have done, this is the bottom, the work I have done will help my organisation to understand the value of visual storytelling. And the HEIs definitely considered that to be a less true statement than the UKCEH people. Time's going on, and all of this is in a report that Tom has written, so I'm just picking highlights. So this is just a wee visual. This is my attempt at design, Peter, so I'm very happy to get criticism of this, but it is just, there was hundreds of comments, a bit like Sue, so I've taken out a couple, 4 in fact, basically to say that people learned, they enjoyed talking to different people and learning from them. A really important aspect was do your science in your normal way, but then do the design. They're almost like 2 separate jobs. They are different tools. You wouldn't use Affinity necessarily to draw the graph, but you would to explain the graph, if I understand correctly, Peter. I can see your head moving, so you can correct me if I'm wrong here. But an issue that came up time and time, this final bullet, I would love to do more, but we'll have to see if I can make the time for it. So this lack of time is an issue, and it's not unusual. I mean, people would like to do more science, but they don't have time. So this is just a trade-off. But I think we've learned this afternoon that the trade-off is really worth it, that people understand the science, and more we're all being pushed to do impact from the science that we're doing. And we're paid by the public many times. This work particularly is paid by the public. So I think of my mother or my granny is paying, and we want to give value for money. So I think this design idea, this interpretation in a sense of our science is really, really important. And that's all I had to say about that. As I say, Tom has a wonderful report where all the comments are there and detailed much more than I have done here. Thanks, Helen.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jan. That's a really useful overview, and just, yeah, wonderful to hear so many positive comments. And thank you again to Peter for leading us through such a great course, and for Tom for all his inputs in the sort of co-design part of that. But I absolutely take away that message around in future thinking about that co-design aspect. And please do get in contact with us if you would like more information about anything that you've heard today, or indeed if you're thinking that it might be great to use some of these UKSCAPE data sets. We'd be really delighted to help you find your way in terms of downloading those data sets and making use of them, or discussing ideas and collaborating going forward. So thank you all for being with us, and I really hope that you'll find value in our UKSCAPE data sets, and you can just see the range that are here, and they're freely available. We want to see them used far and wide and exciting ways, and I hope that you've been inspired by the presentations that we've seen today. I've been even more inspired than I imagined I would be. So thank you again to all our great speakers. Very kindly, Peter's volunteered to stay around for a little bit longer if people have any other questions or would like to stay. Please do, but otherwise that's the end of our formal or informal proceedings, and it's been a really, really wonderful afternoon. So thank you all again for all your contributions, and a great slide there to leave up, and to thank you to the UKSCAPE the project team who oversee everything that we're doing. You can see there's a lot going on within the UKSCAPE program, and we are managed extremely well and extremely effectively. And again, finally, to thank UKRI and NERC for the funding to do this.